That's the definition of a granite. So, but you can use granite for all kinds of things. But there's got to be a technical word and there's got to be a general word. Now, I'm not inventing Stonewall interest or Stonewall history or Stonewall management or Stonewall masonry. I'm not doing that. What I'm trying to do is elevate this phenomenon to the status of a landform, right? And then use science to investigate that landform, because there's actually very little history about what happened.
I think that deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, okay,
really
good. So if we get the science behind it, and it's not hard, you just have to agree on terms, right? And you have to agree on methods. That's what all sciences are doing, all right? And then somebody in Vermont, using the same terms and the same methods, can compare their observation with you down here using the same terms and same methods. If you don't have the same terms and the same methods, it's like polling, you know? You can't believe any of it, right? And so that's what I'm trying to do, and make it regional. And Rhode Island is the coolest place for this, because it has the highest concentration of stone walls originally in 1871 of anywhere in the region. And there's reasons for that we can talk about later, but we wanted to do the outdoor piece, right? So it is the highest, and I'm guessing that this area, I don't know whether it's Tiverton or Little Compton or Westport, but somewhere down in here has the highest concentration of walls. And I'm not going to say it does until, even though the guy in the journal did a good job.
Yes,
you know,
he
wanted to say that, but then he quoted me qualifying it, you know, because I don't know that yet, because somebody hasn't gone to that beautiful LiDAR map from URI and verified that those are indeed walls, and then summed them together and then done spatial statistics, you know, from Westport to here. And then you could say yes, because the historic records are useless. You know, just like the historic record on that beautiful object that I showed you doesn't exist. And the historic record for this may exist. The odds of history having something to say about your walls are much higher here than they are in most of the interior New England, because this is not pioneering farmstead stuff. You know, the pioneering farmstead stuff is like anything goes. Every 20 feet looks different, all right? You're building it, you may only last 30, 40 years and you're gone. People are here for centuries. These are truly colonial walls. Most walls in New England average over the area, forget your state identity, averaged over the area are not colonial at all. They're built between the end of the Revolution and the Erie Canal. That's only 50 years. And if you added 25 years on either side of that, you know, you've got what, 100 years, right? Or you see, but your walls predate those, so they're going to be better, right? They're going to be better, more taken care of, because they've been around longer. All right. So, but I wanted to start with granite, because if you take a look at this, and we know it's granite. Here's a granite. You see? So now I can take a scientific definition of an object and I can apply it there. What about the shape of these guys? Okay, that's a slab bordering on a prism. And I don't care what a mason would call it, all right? There's a functional size that masonry uses, all right, or special stones that they use. This is close to a tablet shape. When Moses goes up on the mountain and he comes down, right, he doesn't carry a slab, he carries a tablet. Why? Because it's thin, you see? So let's find a slab. Here's a nice slab right here. Okay? It's longer than it is wide, but not greatly so. And it's wider than it is thick, but not greatly so. It's like a suitcase, right? That's a slab. So what happens if you thin a slab?
Tablet.
You get a tablet, right? You get a tablet. So this is probably either a thin tablet, a thick tablet, or a thin slab, and I don't care. You know, as long as you use those words to help you pay attention to what they are. All right? So every stone has a length and a width and a thickness, even a rounded billiard ball. Right? They're undefined when they're diameters, but they're undefined when they're cubes, right? Because they're all the same. But if you take a cube put it in a cardboard box, and the long axis and the three axes have to be at right angles to each other. You can't take this as a width and that as a length because you're compromising something. So you got to imagine putting that in a cardboard box and measuring the dimensions of the box. Take the most tight-fitting box you have, right, and measure that. That's the length, width, and thickness of your stone. Now we don't use X, Y, and Z for stones. We use A, B, C. But you get the idea. A is length, B is width, C is thickness. Right? And when we're looking at walls, look at this one down here. Okay? Look down there. This is the X direction. It doesn't matter. It's the length. You know what that is. This is the width, right? And this is the height. That's X, Y, Z. And there's got to be a datum. We don't really have a datum. We did a number on it. We didn't probably have a curved corner on it originally, you know, but they certainly curved the drainage ditch here. So most all walls end, you know, at right angles, or at least at sharp angles. Okay? So this is a curved termination. A wall. This is one wall. That's another wall. Walls have ending points. They're called terminations. This one is a curved termination on both sides. Every taxonomy stinks. Every description protocol stinks because you could say, oh no, this is a curved wall. If you took this object and didn't see much of it, it could just be a round circle, right? That's still a wall, technically, you know, if it's big enough. I don't care about the ends of the classification. It's impossible to come up with a good classification. I tried, and 4 other anonymous peer reviewers tried, and they said, yeah, yours is as good as any. So I'm going with that. Okay, so let's look at, and this one is close to a blade. The blade is like think of a bread knife, you know, longer than it is wide, greatly so, see? And wider than it is thick, greatly so, you see? That's a blade. If you have a long one that is width and thickness are close to the same, that's a prism, see? And if you take a cube and you knock the corners off, you get a ball. If you take a slab and you knock the corners off, you get a pillow, right? If you take a tablet and you knock the corners off, you get a disc. See how that works? It's really straightforward. Take a prism and knock the corners off, you get a column. Just terminology. Have we got size? Okay. Let's do. What else? Let's have a question.
What are these rocks?
What are these? Okay.
What are the other ones?
What are these rocks
Stones.
or what are these stones?
Stones.
Those are different questions.
What are these stones?
What are these stones? This is granite. Almost all of these are what we call, okay, forget what these are. Weakly metamorphosed mud rocks, okay? Rhode Islanders call a lot of this stuff slate. Okay, technically it's not slate, but I don't care if you do. Here's a nice piece of it. See, it's got some shine to it and a nice discrete layering. See that?
You know, it's all over the west side.
Yeah, I know. Do you call that slate?
I would.
Yeah.
Or
Okay, well, a
shale.
geologist would call it phyllite.
Or shale. We've got quite a bit of shale on here.
Yeah, and here's probably, it doesn't matter. This rock is the Narragansett Formation, or the Narragansett Group, named for the bay. Okay? The geology of Rhode Island is based on the bay. It's like an upside-down Seattle half-sized. I mean, that freaks people out when I say that, but it's just a beautiful harbor. It's a bedrock basin from it is a bedrock basin. You know what I mean? Like there's some crustal stuff going on. Stretches the crust. There's a sag, and in that sag is terrestrial stuff. You know, like plant fragments and coal and some primitive insects and whatever. And they're basically, and the streams are all flowing into this basin. And the basin sometimes has a shoreline and sometimes it doesn't. But the middle of it is black and anoxic, like mud, you know, stinky mud. So it's this ancient basin. Then that ancient basin, made of mud and sand and silt and just general sandy stuff, gets buried. It gets lowered in the crust, and when it does, it gets hotter and more pressure. That make sense? Okay. So what happens is if you go down, you know, a few feet, you still have mud. If you go down 100 meters, you got shale. And shale is basically mud pressed together but not recrystallized. You see? Yeah.
Where does the clay come in?
Clay is an important part of, it's a good question, it's an important part of shale and all of the rocks that I'm going to talk about. Clay is a particle size, all right? It's anything finer than 1/256th of a millimeter. Okay, so it's like really fine clay. You can put it in a candy bar and it's like filler. Okay, that's clay. All right, but clay is also a mineral. You know, a mineral that actually there's a group of minerals called the clay minerals, and they're platy. They're platy minerals.
Is that where the silica comes in?
All of this is silicate. The most common stuff we have here is silicon dioxide. Do you know that oxygen is the most important element in the Earth's crust? Oxygen, you know, not that stuff, not free oxygen, just oxygen in crystal lattices. So chemically, most of this is silicon and oxygen, with a little bit of iron and some alkalins thrown in, you know, like sodium and calcium and potassium and things like that. Yeah.
We found volcanic ash
Yeah.
as well.
There are coal beds and volcanic. The reason this is such dirty sediment is there's a lot of volcanic activity going on in the basin. Thank you for reminding me about that. And there's a discrete volcanic ashes in here, and there are discrete coal beds in here. But the coal beds aren't mineable, really. They were in the colonial days, but barely. And they're very rare and scattered because they're so high grade, you know, that you've mostly cooked them away and sent all the volatiles bye-bye. You know, so they're really not good coal beds. But it's not rock that's been so metamorphosed or remelted, it's just been pressed. So if you keep pressing that shale, you know, another kilometer down, you get slate. You know what slate, real slate, like the stuff on roofs? There's a lot of that around here. But then you keep that, take it to the next level, you get phyllite. And that's what this is. The dominant shiny mica rock that you look at around here, you can't really see it, it has a sheen to it. That's slate, that's phyllite. You don't need to know that word. You can go from slate to schist if you want, all right? Because if you cook it more, you get schist. And what's schist? Schist is a rock that is layered, it has a grain like meat or wood, but it's not banded. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a German word called schist, S-C-H-I-S-T. And then if you keep cooking that a little further, you get what's called gneiss, or gneiss, you know? And that's a banded rock, right? And then if you cook gneiss a little bit, you melt it, okay? You've reached the melting point, it turns into a pudding, right? And it comes back as granite. That makes sense? So that's the whole continuum, and all you need to do is start with mud. And then, you know, I talked as if we're mostly talking about fine-grained sediments. There are sandstones all over the place. And then there are pudding stones. You know, they're conglomerates, but they're squash pebble conglomerates if you look at them. Especially at First Beach, Newport, if you look at those outcrops, you know, the pebbles aren't elliptical, they're shaped like pancakes, you know, but they're discrete, you know, pebbles that are looking like rounded pancakes. And that's because of the pressure and the temperature took that, so that's a meta-conglomerate. So these are weakly metamorphosed and very, very heavily influenced sedimentary rocks, you know. So that's what most of these are. And the weird thing is, I'm pretty sure I looked at the map, and I think the map is wrong, because the map says that this is, we're sitting on top of high-grade Proterozoic metamorphic rock, you know, like real crystalline stuff. Now, I could be wrong, but it doesn't matter, because where does most of this stone come from? It comes from the bottom glacial litter, you know, that's covering the surface. And so where is immediately upstream? Narragansett Bay, you see? So the glacier is not only, it's literally carving Narragansett Bay. And I don't like to use the word carving in context of glacial because everybody overuses it. You know, glacier is the verb carve is the default verb to use whenever you mention glacials. Oh, the glacier carved this or that. It literally carved Narragansett Basin. And it's you know, and the islands or the hills are residuals being streamlined in the direction of ice flow. And so the bottom 30 meters of that, say take that telephone, everybody look at that pole, and just imagine a concentration of stone exponentially declining from the bottom, you know, go up about 5 meters and it's a lot of stone, okay? But from 5 meters up to the top, there's a decline in the amount of stone. and then it's pure blue, beautiful crystalline ice, right? But almost all of the motion of that glacier is taking place in the telephone pole zone thickness, right? The shear zone. And so those stones are being crushed and ground and yanked and torn and banged into each other, right? In the bottom 20 or 30 meters of the ice. Does that make sense? Then what happens is when the glacier is retreating, or the edge is receding to the north, if the glacier thins to about the height of that telephone pole or double that, if the glacier is thinner than 2 telephone poles, or about 100 meters, or no, 30 meters. It depends on a lot of things. So say from 30 to 50 meters. If the glacier thins, it's still way thick but it can't move. You see? It can't move, but it's got all that crap in the bottom of it, right? Nice snow, right? And so how does that get deposited? It just gets let straight down like a shroud on the landscape. Does that make sense? That's called melt-out till. Yeah, but the till below that is stuff that was sheared and pasted and crushed and and inundated, to the bottom, the hard pan. That's the stuff that's deposited by glacier sliding. This stuff is the stuff that is caused by the glacier, the last of the ice just melting straight down. Okay? Question?
So did the mixing and transport of rock by the glaciers happen in like a predictable way so we could say at any point along Narragansett Bay, like all the rocks we're looking at, like 50% of them came within 50 miles and 10% of them came from 100 miles away or something like that?
Ideally, you'd like to be able to do that, but statistically it's hard because the rock outcrops are difficult, the basal glacial behavior is different, and the quirks of history are different. But you're right about the general idea. Most of the sand and silt that we have in this field probably comes from Canada or northern New England. A lot of it. Because the smaller you are, the farther you travel.
Why is it that you go to Westport and all the stones are yellow and round?
That's because they're not Narragansett group. That's to the east. We're getting them, even if we are on granite or granite gneiss here, we're so close to the bay that the bottom of the glacier has got all this Narragansett group stuff in it. It's basically a sandstone, silt, muddy basin.
And what's the Westport stone called?
That would be some kind of Proterozoic granite. East Bay and West Bay both have big plutons of granite from, say 100 million years ago. Right? And that's just a mass of molten magma that just crystallizes underground like the Sierra Nevadas. It just crystallizes underground. All right? And it's a very different rock. Yeah, and it will weather to a yellow light color.
Great amounts. They've got a lot of drumlins out there too. Is that alluvial glacial?
It's not alluvial.
Okay.
A drumlin is the word we use for any streamlined hill, smoothed by, it's an eminence that is smoothed by the passing of the ice.
Okay.
All right.
Does that
And
have
I would
anything to do with the round stones that are so prevalent over there? Or?
let's do one thing at a time. A drumlin is anything smoothed by the ice, by the passing of the glacier. It's like a rake, a rake in the same direction. That would be like, and a drumlin would be the high part, and the trough is the lower part. Even the campus that I work on at the University of Connecticut, it's shaped like this. It's like the high parts are all streamlined and rocky, and the bottom parts are carved. And then the rounded stuff. If you have a, here I'll get this. Pretend this is a pencil, okay? It's a pencil. And I put my hand there and I shear it. And look what happens to it. See? It spins, right? So if I had a prism underneath my glacier and I was doing this to it, wouldn't I be necking off the corners? But you and I both know that if I'm rolling a prism, one end is going to lag behind the other and one's going to move ahead. That'll be snapped in half because that's a pretty weak shape. You see, it's easier to break a prism than it is a block, right? So we end up with mostly blocks and slabs. And tablets are not that common. Real tablets. When you get a thin tablet, you see them in the nicely packed stone walls over there on Aquidneck Island.
We have to make them.
You pretty much have to make them around here. That's good to know. He knows. He's got a rock split. Okay, you have to make them because the reason is is that if a glacier, you know, is carrying a tablet and it presses against the granite boulder, what's going to happen? The tablet is just going to snap. And so forth, and that's where a lot of the fine-grained materials come from. Once you get a rounded surface, a boulder, right, it's kind of hard to break it, especially if they're made of granite because there's no grain to it. You know, it's just strong in all directions. And so I have seen very, very few. I think I've seen one big granite boulder here in north of us, about a half a mile or so in a field. And those are probably far traveled.
They're probably what?
Far traveled.
Far traveled.
Yeah, we don't know where they're from. It turns out, to his question, is really prescient. They've done really good studies of it at the pebble size and on up, and most of the pebble and up size stuff comes from 10 kilometers. You know, the nearest 10 kilometers. It's not far traveled. But you know, there's outliers to every population, and you know, the big rounded stuff. Once you get a rounded boulder, it's really hard to break them.
I wish I'd known a lot of this when I went to Europe. And, right, I'm sorry. And watched and toured these incredible cathedrals.
Toured cathedrals, yeah.
I marveled at the fact that all they had was this.
Yeah, well, it's a marvel they built those cathedrals, but they did not. There's something called dimension stone,
Okay.
you know, or granite. Ideally, if it's like the Sierra Nevadas and it just cools underground, it's not got a grain to it, you can cut and split that in any shape you like. You know, it's strong enough to do that, but you can't cut schist like that because it has a grain to it, right? So what happens is, if you're going to build a cathedral out of rock, you either want dimension stone, and you see that around big buildings, and the best dimension stone to work with is not granite, it's something like limestone or marble. It's just easier to work with because it's softer, you know. But then you also build cathedrals out of layered stone, you know. And if a stone is naturally layered, you can just do it. So we didn't get very far. Lithology. What's this made of? There are these granite like this one. That's not Narragansett group. That comes from probably north of Providence, based on the flow line. In other words, there's no granite between north of Providence and here on the glacier flow line. See, it's all Narragansett group. So that makes sense. Most of our rock are the meta sandstones and the meta mudstones. You know, they're metamorph, they're crystalline, so they're harder. You get fantastic wall stone because it's soft enough to work with, right? But it's hard enough to hold up to the weather, and it comes in tablets and slabs.
The nice you could practically carve with a 2-pound hammer.
A nice,
You could
yeah.
shape it. Yep.
Yeah, I bet. So we haven't gotten very far.
Did you go to the stone house, Donna? Did you take him to the
Which stone house?
Never mind.
That's not what was the building.
The stone house.
The building.
The one everybody in the world knows about.
That's not
Which stone house?
There's a stone house on Sakana Point that's made of blocks.
Yeah.
That was block brought in for the.
I haven't been there today, but I think I saw it 5 years ago. So yeah, I've been there.
And was that brought in with the breakwater?
If you're near a river,
Contract to do the breakwater and fill in a little bit extra
Yeah.
for his house.
I got you.
if you're near a river or a shore or a whatever, you can barge in dimension stone really, really effectively. Yeah,
Just, I heard you talking about the bedrock around here.
yeah.
It's a good percentage red granite, and then there's some pockets of like shale
Immediately
slate.
below us.
Yes,
Whoa,
I drilled wells in this town
you drill wells. So yeah, because the
and my father's done it for 35 years.
good. Well, I'm a geologist, and so what I was saying was I looked up the bedrock map, and we're supposed to be on hard granite.
Yeah, like this corner is blue. Down towards the riverbed is blue.
Oh yeah, that's all.
As you get up this way, really hard, really hard red granite.
Yeah. So he used the word blue. This stuff, right?
Yeah.
That's not a common word. There is a, we call it green schist. It's the lowest rank of metamorphism. It's called the green schist facies, but it has a blue tinge to it when you combine the chlorite, which gives you the green. We're not making very fast. So what did I do? I did shape.
Frank your dad?
Did I do composition?
Yeah.
Did I do size? No, I didn't. Okay. This is a one-hander. All the rest of these are hefted stones. A hefted stone is something that I could grab with 2 hands when I'm 20 years old, right? And just heft it onto a wall. You know, and that probably peaks out depending on its shape. You know, if it's shaped like a watermelon, the weight is different from if it's shaped like this. These are easy to lift when you're 20 and when your back is in good shape and all
Hey, we
that.
can
But
still do it at 63.
they're hefted, yeah. And so, but if Luke and I were to take different corners and heft it into a wall, it would still be a hefted stone. I don't care if it's 2 hands or whether it's 4 hands. You know, the idea is that human beings, laborers, are just pitching, not pitching, they're stacking stone. You got it? They're just stacking. That's a hefted stone. And then there are, you all have seen them, especially post-petroleum, you know, where you get these big stones up in the wall or even in the base of the wall. We don't even see them here very much. You know, there's a lot of walls that have big stones at the bottom, you know, and if those are enough of those, you call it a foundation tier, you know. But if you just have a few of them, they're just big ones. 2 people couldn't move those, you know. So you're talking an ox, 10 teenagers, you know, a ramp, a chain, a lever, a tripod. I don't care what it is. We don't even know. We don't even know how to think about it. You can move a rock with a block and tackle like an engine, you know, out of a car, right? You know, I can't lift an engine out of a car, at least the old 60s Chevy that I used to have. You know, and nor could 2 of us pick it up. But with a chain, block and tackle, it's fairly easy. So when you see the next level up is called assisted stone. You need help, right? But it's been moved, you see? And so that's a really important clue. Because if you're up in western Massachusetts or something and you see that, it means it's not pioneering farming. You know, it's architecture. Somebody's doing that because it isn't worth the trouble just to get rid of the stone or to line it up. You know, it's okay to drag it, but once you lift it, that doesn't happen very often, right? And then the last size is called residual stone. And a residual stone is one you can't move or aren't going to bother to move until you blow it up later when you get a giant front end loader, you know, in the 1950s, you know, because you'll see a lot of walls that look like this, and then there'll be big boulders on the top or on the side. Those are what I call petroleum walls. In other words, those stones weren't moved until you could move them, okay? Until you had easy assistance. And then the residual stones are sometimes in a wall, but it doesn't mean it was moved there. All right, so you got the size. Now how about the degree of packing? Luke's a stonemason. He only does laid walls, right? Or at least the cell phone. In other words, this is a laid wall because you actually think about where the stone's going. In other words, if this one goes there, then I got to get a different stone to put it there. And you know, you can see there's usually a grain. Sometimes there's courses in the wall. Sometimes you can just see that this one is put there so that it'll support that one. And it's hard to describe it mathematically, but everybody knows what it looks like. It's a nice looking wall. You hire masons to lay walls, right? You don't hire masons to dump walls. You don't even hire them to stack walls, usually, okay? So that's a laid wall. Can we all agree on what that's looked like?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, do you want to go up or down? Next. Up, here you go. Steve, up or down? Up, okay. Above laid wall, which is a pretty serious wall. This is a laid wall and nothing else, right? But above a laid wall is what I call a patterned wall. And a patterned wall is anything above and beyond laid in terms of investing the order. Like putting a shamrock, you know, or making a Dalmatian wall.
Or mosaic.
Or the mosaic walls that you'll see around here. You know, where there's a pattern that you're actually trying to build. You don't need to do that. That's folk art, you know. That's a pattern beyond just laying a wall. This is a laid wall. Classic, well-established farm wall like this is laid but not patterned. Okay, especially if you're in a place where the stones are mostly tablets and slabs and whatever. If you go to Westport and if it's all cannonball-shaped boulders, right, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between a laid wall and a stacked wall and a dumped wall because all the particles fit together. You don't even put any order in. You see what I'm getting at? That's the degree of order. So let's come down from a laid wall. This is a laid wall, not a patterned wall. I've seen shamrock walls. It's folk art. It's beautiful. Then there are sometimes even indigenous motifs in it. You know, those are really cool, but it's beyond laid. And that's not, if you're going to inventory the stone walls, you're not going to see much of that. You know, but you need to know that it's possible. And you need a term to describe it. If you see a shamrock, that's not a laid wall by Thorson, it's a pattern wall. A pattern wall is a laid wall plus. See? The next one down is stacked. Now when you stack cordwood, if you're not making excuses to be out of the house, right, you don't lay your cordwood, do you? You just stack it. Right? You just stack it. And that's, you're investing a little bit of order in it, because if you don't stack the stone, it's a sprawling pile. Right? But you're not really trying to lay it, you just want to get the damn stuff out of the way, you're going to stack it. And most of our single walls are stacked. You know, they're not laid. So you got stacked. It's like doing cordwood. And I have a thing, I always say this, think about the library. You go into a library and all the books are on the floor, right? You can't get around. So what do you do to get them out of the way? You stack them. And then you can move in and out and do all of that. Okay, but now, what happens? Do you stack the books by their shape? No. So there's no laid shelves, right? You don't really think about which book would look nice next to another one. You do either the decimal system, or you do the Library of Congress, or you do fiction, or you do last name, or you do whatever. In other words, so the tops of the shelves are always like this. They're not laid. See, they're stacked. You got it? So the next level below stacked, which is just that, is dumped. Now he came with a truck, right? So if you have just a complete truck full of stone, and you just back it up, and you lift it, and it just falls down, and that's where it is, that's dumped. Okay?
Is that a dump wall?
It is down the ways, yes. Down the ways it is. Excellent. He's learning. Dump wall. Now you can also have a dump wall by just pitching the stones. You see? As long as you're not stacking them. You just pitch them, it'll look the same.
Was that dump wall, stacked wall 100 years ago?
Probably, but we got to go look at it. I can't see it. So I'll
Get
wait.
over here where we
Ask the question when I can see it. How's that? But I'm just trying to finish this so you get the degree of order.
Yeah.
Okay, somewhere else we'll look at wall dimensions. Okay? And somewhere else we'll look at wall class. Let's do wall classification. Wall classification. He actually read the taxonomy and told me. It's like 40 pages of the first, I think the first third of it's pretty interesting. And then after that it's just a method manual kind of a thing. But
I didn't read the last 10 pages.
yeah, good. This is we looked at the break in it, and every time you have a category and you try and break it into another category, there's always problems. The classic double wall, right, is built from both sides, and it's got a batter on it. You know what I'm talking about. Most of these walls are double walls, all right? It doesn't matter what the top looks like, okay? If it's built from both sides up to the top course of stone, it's a double wall. This is a capped double wall, okay? It's capped with shaped tablets. You see that? Or thin slabs. You know, you could call them, as long as you get the idea, that's what's important.
So what makes it a double wall?
We can see that over there. It was built from both sides. Luke builds them all the time. You basically build a stack, you're using the walls leaning into each other for support. And it creates a hollow space in the middle that you often fill with smaller stone or stuff like that. But it's actually a strong and elegant way of building a wall. If you just have a stack of stone, it's not as strong. You know, a single stack of stone, it's not as strong. So that's a double wall. This is a capped double wall. Okay? I mean, in my classification.
So there's a face on either side.
Yeah, there's a well-done face. That's what I meant for built. Good point. Built from both sides, meaning you think about each face, right? If you're building a single wall, the way you build most walls in New England, not here, but most walls in the country where I live are just back pasture single walls. And what they look like is you usually skid the big ones, you know, to along the old fence line. So there's usually big ones at the bottom, and then you just push them all together. You push the big ones together from the bottom, and so it might start as a double wall with like boulders, you know, down at the bottom, but very quickly it goes into that triangular shape. You know, it's not two nice faces. It's just kind of a crude triangle, and it always ends with a stack of stone on the top. Usually it's the same stuff below, but you just run out of stone. And that's a single wall. And the other classification, we're not going to see them, is a broad wall. A broad wall is like a double wall that's over wide, extra wide. And you've probably seen those, where you build a wall over here with a face on it, you build a wall over there with a face, and then you just fill it with crap, rubble, crap, stone, whatever. You don't need dirt, it doesn't matter. The idea is to get rid of stone. The English call them consumption walls, okay? Consumption, because the goal is to consume the stone. It's a lot easier to build, a fat double wall than two double walls, you see? If the stones are supporting each other, it's a double wall, and this is a double wall, okay? In my classification, okay? And then I'm almost done. Then there's a double wall, single wall, broad wall, a butting wall. When I came in here to the town hall, I saw boulders in a park, that were spaced apart, right? There are gaps. You can walk right through it.
Yeah.
If you push those stones together, it would be in a butting wall. That is big blocks pushed together. And those are the main kinds. And then the crummiest is called a band. And a band is actually a stone wall. It's not beautiful like this. It's just it's just like a low pile of stone. But as long as the stone is resting on other stones, I call it a wall. No matter how low it is. It's just and that's usually a fence line where you just pitch stone and it just creates a mound, and they can run for a long distance. In fact, they're very common. Not here, because the stone was used and the land is precious, and so you don't want a band.
In your book, you talk about an estate wall.
Yes. Which book? Exploring Stone Walls?
I think it's Stone by Stone.
Yeah, that's 2002. I've changed some of my terminology since then.
Okay.
An estate wall it's not the taxonomy is all about what you can see, not what you think happened.
Gotcha.
By the way, let me talk about what a criminal is. You all know what a criminal is?
Yeah.
Okay? And you all know what profiling is like? I mean, it's a problem. We all got that concept? You can't look at someone and say they're a criminal. Can you?
No.
I mean, do I know if you have a record? I don't know. I can't tell by looking at you if you have a record. In other words, that's a genetic classification. I have to know what happened in order to classify a criminal. Right? You're convicted of a crime. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You can't see a criminal, but you can classify one. Right? So an estate wall is like, I can't be out in the woods and call something an estate wall if I'm trying to be based on physicality and wall structure. I can only add that.
These are the walls that are cut by masons, where every stone is hammered, dressed, and cut.
There's a
lot of.
They definitely exist. But what I'm trying to do is have an observable, classification that you can see in the ground. That you can see here, and all the rest is graded. So the idea of a criminal, you can't see a criminal, but you can develop what does a criminal look like. Well, that's dangerous. It's called profiling, but we do it all the time. We do it all the time.
15-minute warning.
All right, well, we didn't get very far. Let's walk down here. They're the strongest stones in New England. It's really hard to get rid of them.
Well, what do you call that? Mudstone?
I think it's a quartzite. I think this is far traveled.
It's a fine grain.
It's just it's basically a sand. If you took a beautiful pure quartz beach sand, right, and you just fused it like a slate stone glass window, it'd be stronger than if you just had a crystal of quartz.
They're incredible.
Yeah, they're very, very, very hard. And they're hard to
You
break.
look at them and they're this big and you can't lift them. Come on.
This is the classic mud rock, blue rock. The guy called it bluestone. And bluestone is okay. It's usually associated with that boundary between sedimentary and metamorphic rock. You'll see it here. This is a layered granite-like stone. I'd say that was probably local.
Get the camera here.
There's slabs. We're getting some balls in here. That's if you have a wall made only of that, I call it a cordwood wall. And it's an informal. It looks like split wood. Yeah, it's chloride will give you a greenish tone. and the blue comes from usually the iron associated with it. So you get kind of like a bluish chlorite, and that's what gives your rocks the blue color. Here's a nice tablet. See that? That's a real tablet. How long would that last in the base of the earth? Here's a pudding stone. It could even be, some of the pudding stone is like concrete, and you can hardly tell the difference.
So a stone that big is all over the bottom of my walls. And I'm assuming that they are not controlling the stone.
No, I don't think they are. If they're in the bottom of the wall, they're not.
So they would be dragged there by oxen.
Yes.
They'd be hard to,
Yeah, they'd be
even for 3 or 4
If
men.
you see how that boulder is made of pebbles and cobbles, and then sand is in the matrix, and then when you metamorphose that, or when you crush it and press it and lithify it, this is not very metamorphosed because the pebbles aren't misshapen. But if in deeper parts of the same rock basin, the pebbles are squished like butter. Even if they're hard to work with.
Most of the time when I find what I think is a glacial erratic, like out in the middle of a swamp or something.
So this is, our table is square, but this is what I call a round table. Is there anybody new here that wasn't on the field one? Okay, so then we've met each other. The deal is, I just love stone, I love landscapes, I like people, I like all this. I'm working to try and get to help organizations, inventory their walls, because to me, it's fine to describe them, but if you actually use this, if you're a town, am I talking at the town level here? The town should have an inventory. That's just me saying should, and you should never say should. Right? But, there's stuff out there to learn that you don't know. There are habitats out there that can be characterized that you don't know about. And if you it's like a census, if you don't know anything about a population, you can go and do a census of walls or a census of people, but if males and females and old and young and wealthy and poor, are all in the same people, the story isn't very rich, you see? So if you have a variety of kinds of walls and ages of walls and interesting transitions in stone from mostly Narragansett, we saw the stone change. From in our direction. And the stone can change because you bring stone in or because the landscape varies. And you don't know that. And a lot of stuff isn't written down. And even if it is, it's probably in someone's account book somewhere that you'll never get at. And who wants to go into an archive? That's not as interesting as being outdoors working. And so the idea is an inventory is an important step towards management. You imagine managing wetlands in your town if you don't know where they are. Okay? And you don't know what kind they are. There's a big difference between a red maple swamp, and a salt marsh. But they're both wetlands, So this is where I'm at, and I'm just a citizen scientist here, not working as a consultant, but just trying to help communities. And it could be one landowner. That guy, that retired cardiac surgeon, I forgot his name. He put together a map of his property, and he's kind of like trying to classify them already, and he's fascinated. He said it's way more fun, than some other thing. And I said, I consider this to be like outdoor chess, building a wall or repairing a wall. Because if you think about chess, you get different size pieces, they have different plays, different movements, different whatever. And what you do with one piece matters, with to the next one. Where you put one stone matters, and if you put one here, then you need a certain kind of stone. So it's very much like playing chess outdoors. Just fascinating. And you can do it mentally, by just looking, and just have fun. It beats TV. I like TV, but only at certain times of the day. So I just want to help you. So I'd like to know who you are and what you represent. And I'm here for you. You're not here for me. The idea is that I want you guys to do something at the town level because it's good for the region, it's good for the future, and how can I help you do what I'm asking you to do? That's kind of where I'm at. So I'm going to introduce myself and say I'm Robert Thorson, go by Thor, and I moved from Alaska to New England in 1984, and I just find the area so interesting. I can't believe how cool it is, and the compensations of leaving the majesty and open space in Alaska as a young, 30-year-old, more than made up for by the texture and history of the landscape in New England. It's just so interesting when you add time to it, and there's a lot of stone to look at. So that's who I am. I'm a professor, but I'm a teacher. I'm in community engagement. I'm doing all kinds of stuff, and I'm writing books, and I just want to help people appreciate their stone walls. And for years it was mostly about telling the story and appreciating and researching them, but now it's about helping groups. So, and the idea is that event one is the field walk. We didn't get very far, but hey, that's okay. You get the idea. And then event two is we just have a conversation. And event three is a public lecture that you may or may not go to. Maybe you've heard something like it before. And that's mainly not for the stakeholders, but for the community to get behind whatever you do. You're not going to go anywhere with the town council if they all vote against you. And if you want to do a little bit of inventory, you don't need anything. You just need a couple of volunteers, and anything is better than nothing. And but if you, my vision of doing it right is you get a team together, you get some funding, somewhere, somehow. It doesn't take much. You definitely engage some young people, who can be easily trained to look at a ball and a block and a prism. You don't even need to do that to describe it. You just characterize a section with just one check sheet. I got a check sheet, just check, done, and then that segment of the wall. And it's a good way to get young people in, because I'm very worried. I got land trust I'm working with, and everybody's older, everybody's my age, it's kind of common. And if we don't, why bother to conserve something if 2 generations down the road they don't even know it exists? So I'm really in it for the young people. I'm a father of 4 and a grandfather of 5, and I'm totally into that. And I'm looking at the future. And I've survived 14 presidential elections. When we got the right to vote, we had to agitate. You probably remember. I couldn't vote when I was 18. I got drafted, but I couldn't vote. So by the time I graduated college, I was able to vote. That was a long time ago. All right, so that's me. We can do this popcorn or around the table, I don't care. Who are you and why are you here? Yeah, there we go.
So I work for a couple of the land trusts in town, and I walk miles and miles of stone walls.
What's your name?
Adam Yorks.
Adam York.
I walk miles of walls in the more remote parts of town, in the swamps and the old fallow farmland, and I see areas that are where the stone walls are more complex. It looks like it was an impoundment for livestock, and every time I see something that catches my eye, that stands out, I take pictures of it, because what I'm mostly looking for is how the stone walls can reflect past land use, because depending on if that was always a forested land or if it's a former homestead or farm site, that affects conservation decisions in present day, because it tells you what sort of disruptions happen to the soil or the plant community. So I'm really interested into what to look for, and when something stands out as unique and maybe worth looking at closer or protecting, because we can't protect every wall in town.
No.
A lot of them are just going to get overgrown and then knocked over by trees and deer over the decades. But some of them are probably more relevant to Little Compton's history and worth a closer look.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that goes through my mind walking the walls here.
Yeah, so in your case, you're working for them, you said? So are you a mason or a...
No, I'm
or
a conservationist with 2 land trusts.
Right, okay. Yeah, I'm a land trust volunteer too, so I kind of get that. Yeah. Just any language is better than no language for observing and writing things down and describing walls. and keeping the interpretations separate from your observations, build up to the interpretations. Like your Rhode Island state law, commingles function, like it was built to do this with material, like this is the material thing, which isn't function. And then there's the chronology, you know? And it's built into your state definition. And they're conflated in ways that I can't unpack them. And if I were a lawyer on one side, I could say, this isn't what you're talking about. It's pretty embarrassing. Yeah, it gets worse. Yeah.
I just ask, in looking at the Rhode Island state laws, my impression is that they're mostly concerned with perimeters and boundaries, property lines.
Absolutely.
And if they're not on the perimeter or boundary or the property line, they're not really covered.
That's right, they're not covered at all. They are if they're in a national park or a state park, you know, to the extent that the state can manage what happens interior to its property. But a property owner can do whatever they want, you know. And 100 years ago they were crushing them for roadbed, and 180 years ago they were incentivizing people to bury them, you know. But we're in a different phase right now, you know, where I think conservation and history and landscape are now more important than having a better paved road, you know, through Little Compton Center. I may be wrong. I'm not trying to speak for you either, but the laws are about right-of-ways and roadside walls and property boundaries and that sort of thing. But you can incentivize a community to preserve their walls, even if they own them in the interior properties.
How do you go about doing that?
I don't just
incent. I mean, have you known communities that have had success in doing
that? They have tried. The Rhode Island walls are about theft mostly.
In Massachusetts, in Concord, you have scenic preservation
Yes.
areas and towns which protect
Yes.
interior
Yes.
walls.
It's definitely hodgepodge, and I'm not an attorney. I assume we have some attorneys in here, but that's not me. And I just think that it doesn't work. You know, it doesn't work for everybody. There's always going to be outliers, but I think a general consensus of community that walls are important, you know, to conserve and interpret and protect and inventory, then you're most of the way there. You're never going to get them all. You're going to always have to make choices about, you know, what to take and what to leave and what to rebuild. I don't know if I answered your question. What was your name?
Jeff Swabe,
Jeff Sway.
and I'm involved with the Westport Land Trust.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
I'm Abigail Brooks. I'm one of those old people that's involved in land trusts. I've been on the Conservation Association board for 20 years. And the way we've gotten young people involved is by hiring them, like Jeff, who works as our stewardship director. I've seen that elsewhere. We've tried to get young people on our board, and it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we've done with our management plans for properties that either we own or hold conservation easements on is put protected language for stone walls into the management plan or into the conservation easement, specifically saying things like the walls that currently exist can only be restored with laid dry. No stones can be removed from the property, that sort of thing.
That's wonderful.
Fred will probably remember the title, but we did have, as an official in Little Compton at one point when I first was living here, a stone wall minder as an actual literal position, which is probably from colonial times. We no longer have that. But so we do, in a sense, there are some prototypes for how to write language. And of course, this addresses part of what you talk about in your writing about how do you protect walls that are on private property. So when a conservation easement or a fee donation is made to a conservation organization, the language is there that can be built into the management plan that the conservation easement holder is responsible for ensuring is held.
And yours builds off of Jeff's comment, is that if you're a land trust or you have all these easements, you can control what happens inside of your property, you know. And if you're a landowner, you can do the same thing.
That may depend on a little bit how you're trying to protect it. If it's a farm, for example, I think the farms we have are required to give notice and they want to alter a wall.
Yeah, yeah.
But we don't impose approvals on that.
But regardless of the issue of private property in New England, and I respect it, and I learned it the hard way moving here from Alaska. Guys chasing me off their land. I get it. I wasn't the same off trail. It's not the same thing. Is that the mood changes, the history change, the conservation plans change with time. You can go into, let's say you own 20 acres out there somewhere and it has walls on it. All right, let's just make that assumption. You need a permit to go in there and do anything with a wetland on your land, and you need a permit to go in there to mine any gravel or sand out of that land. There are regulations on your private property, but you can strip mine every wall off of your land, and there's no regulation for that. And I think it's terrible, because I think that those are dry land, special habitats, diversity hotspots, historic linchpins, and as Emerson said, in nature, nobody owns the landscape. You can own this parcel there or this and that, but nobody owns the landscape. And you're here because you like living here. I mean, it would look very different without any walls. And if you had your citadel of private property, you kept all of your walls, and everybody else sold theirs because they could get a lot for them, the town would look very different. And so my point is that there is already some community support for that kind of ambiance or that motif, and it's your community, not mine. You know what to do with it. Or Westport and Little Compton, they're not that different to me. They're in different states, right?
And Westport's about 18,000 water weight, 3,400 here.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. We have 3 people. I hope this is working for you. We've got 3 people weigh in. You get a sense of who each other are and why they're here. And let me just say before I even quit, anybody who has any questions about any of this, feel free to email me, and I'll try and get back. And one thing that I do a lot of, and I'm not inviting 10 days work here, is that if you send me a picture or two, of something that you're just curious about, I can weigh in on it. The pictures are pretty good. If you get a good, like endwise and on and top or whatever, I can do a lot with that, and I do it all the time.
I have a question.
We had a hand up over here. You okay with the question? If you just defer one more.
My name is Ara.
Oh, I was going for that corner. He raised his hand.
My name is Steve Lugard. I'm with the Historical Society. You mentioned interpretation along with protection and conservation. Could you say something more about what interpretation looks like for you?
Yeah. I put an example in the end of the manual. We've just got some primitive early studies. I'm being held up. We worked on a project in 2019, and it was really nice. But the student left, and the other professor got busy, and we agreed to do it, and then they changed the GIS software, and I'm not good at that. So we're going to publish a paper. But the basic idea is that if you have a landscape of let's say that Little Compton is mostly stone bands. I would say that's just primitive farming, and then they quit. And then people began to live here. And they really didn't care much about their property borders. And if you have, the standard is away from the farmstead or the homestead or the cellar hole or whatever, if you work your way away from there, you move from retaining walls to single walls or double walls to broad walls to bands. It's like you can nucleate you can see a village or a farm structure reconstructed from the field remains that you didn't know about before. Maybe you knew it was a town. And somewhere else, you can say there's quarried stone here, but no quarried stone over there. And that's about wealth. That's about age and chronology, because the early, trying to pay down that first mortgage with 2 kids, in a house the size of my garage, working a farm that's 100 acres and it's mostly forested, and you're just trying to, move forward. You're not going to spend the time blowing up boulders or doing much anything. You're just basically trying to survive. And so your walls are not going to look the same as if you were a copper baron, inheriting money from somebody, and you've got built an estate. A good example is like Acadia Park. Rockefeller goes there with his petrodollars and builds granite carriage roads. I mean, we have an ancestor instinct in us, all of us. It's why we know history and why we revere the past and so forth. It's a tribal, evolved human instinct we have, and being able to connect that to stone, you know, and the past is just it's spiritually compelling for me, you know, in a non-theological way. You know, it's above and beyond the fact that something looks nice. You know, there's a compelling attraction, reverence for stone. And that's what it looks like. Another way it looks is that roadside walls look different. You know that we will protect roadside walls in New England in places? You know, scenic roads? Do you have scenic roads in Tiverton or in Westport?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I learned this from, I was reading Robert McFarland, and they have in England, they have a landform called Holloway. Anybody know what a Holloway is? I wrote it down in something lately. Basically what happens is if you have the chalk landscapes of the southern England, you know, have are just not very strong. They're strong and porous if plants just grow on them, but when you start driving vehicles or marching Roman soldiers down them or whatever, you know, you get the beaten path sinks. You know, you end up with basically a plateau, and then the road is actually lower than when you started because the rain just washes it down parallel to the road. You see that on mountain trail, woodland trails. You know what I mean? You're walking a woodland trail and you see the roots of the stones, right? And it's higher on the other sides. That's because of loss and erosion. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened here is we have colonial roads dating back to, you know, the early mid 17th century. And what happens is that if you don't have the cover and you've got the animals walking on them, and you've got wheels and carts and whatever, you know, there's compaction and erosion. And so you get a whale. But guess what happens? You also expose the stone. You see? And so what do you do with it? You just put it up there. You see? So our roads are basically exposing the stone that becomes the walls alongside of the stones. Those are the ones that we designate as historic and interesting, right? And so we have got protected road, you know, scenic road trail stuff on them. But the geology and the history is interesting because the walls are there because the road is there, all right? And so those walls are protected because they created a sunken road or were corollaries to a sunken road. And there's all these little interesting things that that enrich the history of town. Like the simple example that I showed you with that piece of pot metal. That was literally a stone in a wall that somebody walked by 1,000 times, you know, until I walked by it. And I'm not special as an intellect. I am specialized by training. I had paid a lot of attention looking at, you know, I'm not a master craftsman, you know, but I really look at walls very carefully. And so in that case, I spotted something that nobody else did. But you don't have to get that expertise. You could just get a little bit, like big stone, little stone, you know, granite, Narragansett Formation. You don't have to be an expert. Your question?
Yeah. Can you look up LiDAR information?
Yes, Rhode Island has it. I put the link in the guidebook. There's a guidebook online.
Right.
She's got a printed copy of it. And there's a guidebook online, and I wrote this because I had 3 meetings like this, 3 days like this, and people were saying, that was great, but you're gone, you know, we want to start thinking about how we're going to, you know, do an inventory for conservation. And, you know, can you answer? I started writing answers to questions, and I said, why don't I, my wife said, why don't you just write it down? So I wrote down a manual, and I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought it might be a few pages, and it ended up being, you know, fairly extensive. But you don't have to do the whole thing. You know, just any piece is better than no piece. And so I forget what your question was. It was about
LiDAR.
LiDAR, yes. Basically, LiDAR is now available statewide on a website that I put in the guidebook somewhere, and I sent her the link too, and I think she sent me the link at one point. And all of New England is actually now on LiDAR, and it's publicly available.
And there's 2012 LiDAR for Rhode Island, and then there's 2022, which is even better resolution.
It's meter scale?
Okay, good.
I believe so, yeah. And then you can make your own LiDAR if you get a drone, which this kind of preservation's been doing a little bit of. It's kind of time intensive, but it's...
So those of you who know Claire Johnson
Yep.
So her daughter,
Yeah, Katie.
Katie, works with our.
Kate was my student.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's great.
Yeah.
She's great.
It's a nice
And
connection.
she's really a good, her ilk is a really good compliment for my ilk, because she's a tech whiz, you know, on the mapping and the GIS. That's what she trained for. That's what she did. That's what her dissertation is about, you know. And mine is about on the ground, you know, observation and characterization. In spite of all the good work she's done on these, on mapping walls in various places and demonstrating LiDAR, they still haven't described the walls because it's too labor intensive. That's why you need a commitment to a group and a team, and I'll bet you can drive by. It'll enrich your life. If you had an inventory and a map of the differences in stone walls, in the same way as you have different sites or different, and you knew them, when you drive around, you will feel like you live in a richer place because you have more things to think about when you drive by in your familiar life. Yeah.
Reading the Forested Landscape,
Yeah.
Tom Wessels,
Yeah.
thanks. He mentioned about stone walls often marking a transition from, you know, the edge of the farm to the swamp behind the farm or something, as a way to kind of demarcate where the land use changes. And I'm wondering if that's like, if that is an oversimplification or if that's helpful for classifying, and if you can, you know, look at the LiDAR for all of Little Compton and see, okay, these are all the walls that mark the edges of the swamps. Are those like less interesting or less valuable than something that's actually around a homestead or around a recreation area or
Well, you're not going to know that until you map them
yeah.
and describe them and inventory them. Then you will be looking at a map and you can see a pattern. Like you can see a pattern in a census data, you know, demography and age and political instincts or whatever. You see patterns in census data that you can't see until you take a census. And think about how many research projects are based on census and migration and all of that. You need to have data. And so by just having the data, and the bigger the scale, the better. And you know, Vermont to Rhode Island is a great, you know, it's a great transect to be thinking about. So I would say yes. Tom Wessels and I were colleagues. And we talked a lot. He blurbed Stone by Stone when the paperback book came out. He said, everything you need to know about Stonewall. That's 2002. There's a lot more to know about it. But, you know, he said if I were going to buy one book on stone walls, it would be that one. And then he came out with his own forest forensics, you know, using walls because he had a pattern and a following that he was doing. That's great. He's drawing from a lot of the conversations we had and some of the work that I've been doing.
So I guess my question is, I mean, how do we as a community, a town, I mean, what do we want to see going forward? Or do we want to take this on as kind of public awareness? Or the one man who left early, Ted Hayes from the Secundit Times, he's interested in doing a follow-up, and he's more interested in conservation and how would this town go about conserving the walls. I mean, is anyone interested in that, or seeing the town getting people in the town mobilizing around this? I don't know.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
My name is Lara. I represent Historic Preservation Advisory Committee of the town. So the specific purpose of this committee is to recognize historic homes and give out plaques.
Yeah.
In addition to that, we spoke about recognizing historic places where there is no dwelling. But after meeting and taking part in this, I'm wondering if the committee should consider recognizing historic stone walls, particularly on private property, in terms of igniting interest, and they will receive recognition that they have preserved it. Obviously, I need to have some specifics, what's worthy of such a declaration, but that's one way to develop interest alongside with it in a small segment.
Thanks for that. We need to incentivize landowners to cooperate. or to be part of the interest. And that's a good way of doing it. There are historic properties where there's no building left, but you can see the property using the viewpoint of this. You can reconstruct the stone wall pattern and their variants, and there's a history section to the guidebook. There's a lot of ways you can come up with history for walls. They're all a little bit challenging, but you can do it. That you could tell a story on someone's property, and if they have that story, they're less likely to wreck it.
So I'm Mike Steers. I'm going to jump on your idea there. Part of the planning board and the ag trust. And in the comp plan, we have a goal for maintaining rural character, sort of our rural catch-all justification goal. But we have objectives to maintain stone walls, but there's no organization. It's just kind of a desire and wish list. But if we had that historical preservation organization that would take on the assignment, we're in the process of rewriting that. So it's a perfect time for us to define that objective and assign some action items that could be executed in an organization of responsibility to follow through.
I have a question for you.
Oh dear.
Yes. I was going to say, I totally agree. I was talking about my own town planner in Mansfield, Connecticut. Nice rural country. Just happens to have a university in it. But otherwise a lot of rural country. And again, it's always in the plan. Use the word workflow. He's the town planner, they're going to move forward, they're revising the plan, they want to incorporate more language, they want to incentivize people. It's just, I appreciate town government. It's hard to do. But
My question is in town planning and zoning, how frequently do you think the issue of ancient public ways comes up? And I mean public ways, not just simply a cart path on somebody's property, because as I understand it, there's a public interest in maintaining access on ancient public ways. The public, as I understand, has rights to them if they haven't been forgotten. And what you may be talking about is an overgrown path in the middle of nowhere. But oftentimes those overgrown paths are lined with walls, old cart paths, but old public ways. So it seems to me that is a way of, I think there'd be a public interest in preserving those, don't you think?
I do. I think that the first question is identifying them, because most of ours are private ways. And even with regard to the most roads in town are private roads, not town roads. So we have a few state roads with 2 lines, and the rest are, for the most part, anything that's paved is a town road with 1 line. And the paths and whatnot that you speak of, historic, those are all private and part of people's property. Now, some of them, mostly on the east side of town, there are trails that probably were an extension of the west branch of the Westport River that moved their way into Little Compton as those towns, the state line became apparent and the towns broke away. But so from Simmons Mill down to the coast, there are some old trails, but they're all on private property.
But if they predated the private property as public ways, I mean, it's like you have, historically there were some old roads there, and they may have been lost to history, but
I don't know, I'll defer to Steve.
I believe that you're correct, but I've not been able to find them in any sort of legal document. It's worth looking into.
Yeah, okay.
There are paths that go between John Dyer Road and the river.
And Old Harbor Road and Old Harbor.
And then this 2-rod way along the Tiverton boundary, that's lined with stone walls on both sides, but that's not really used by anyone except for a couple of walkers these days.
But that's the thing, it's like, potentially that's public access and history and interest.
How about between Jim Lock and where you live? Is it?
I think that's out of the kindness of Jim Lock. I don't know that was ever.
Is that public?
No, it's his property, and it's like it's very good of him to allow us to walk up his own property.
That's all private.
I would argue that if you have no town records, as you mentioned, but you have a hallway, it's an ancient public way.
I think, personally, I think our first challenge is to take care of the roads, of the walls along the roadside that are visible, that are falling victim to bittersweet like we saw on Long Pasture. If we can get our arms around that, that's a mile ahead of where we are.
I think that's really important too.
Yeah.
That can be
our organization is going to take care of that.
right, and that's got nothing to do with private property,
Clippers.
really. Is it road right away?
Pardon?
Is it road right away?
Yeah.
That's a town.
Yeah.
Long Pasture.
So, I mean, when the highway department comes up and starts rearranging the roads or improving them, I mean, are there efforts to protect the walls on the sides of the roads?
But there's a more direct thing, which is when they mow them, if they mowed up to the stone walls, you could see the stone walls. And that's a fairly straightforward thing to ask the town to do.
Yeah, but
It's already set up for
the state, like in front of my house, they used to come by and mow it and have a couple of guys do weed whacking along the wall. Now they come along and they leave about 3 feet out of the wall. And I go out and clear mine, but other places in town, it's just grown up. It's state property, I assume, outside the stone walls.
The state property goes, or the road, the right of way of the road goes to the wall, in the middle of the wall, probably.
And then that opens up a whole other can of worms with.
Can we get your name?
I'm sorry, Brandon Pinio. That opens up a whole other can of worms because someone mentioned bittersweet and invasive. So, do we justify killing the invasives, or is it just keep up with clippers? Because when you injure bittersweet, it sends a signal to grow faster. So it makes it even worse if we try to traditionally just clip. So I don't know if that's more destructive to clip it rather than leave it, or chemically kill it, even though we're in this delicate environment. It's a very difficult thing to propose.
It is a different, one context for this is that, and I think anyone who's a woods walker knows this, it had just dawned on me, I was like 5 years into this and I finally figured it out, was that when farmers walked away from their walls in their fields, they were just covered with ivy and bittersweet, not bittersweet because that's more recent, but anything. You can't even see the walls. And the white pines are sprouting up, and the hickories are coming up, and then and as soon as the canopy closes and you shade out that undergrowth, that's when all the undergrowth died off. The vines died off, and the walls just appeared like magic. This is a historical consequence, and Robert Frost caught that just exactly right. Where you're like one generation past the main part of abandonment, so you can actually see them. And I refer to this as the botanical curtain. It's like a curtain was just pulled. And you can see what had been there all along, but it was all covered with the ivy and everything. And my sense is that there's really, if you had to take all stone wall conservation issues in mind, there's two basic kinds, and I'm going to mention this tonight in the talk. And there's these roadside walls, or where the public sees them and where they're maintained, and where the heritage walls, they're part of your town geography, they're a sense of place and all of that. The person who built that wall, 2 centuries ago or whatever, I think would want to have it taken care of. And that means cutting the bittersweet down or doing whatever you have to do chemically or whatever. Just getting, allowing the walls to be seen. And it's a can of worms. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I think that's what should be done with roadside and heritage walls. And then, but I think walls where the canopy is closed and you're in the woods and you're just out there, I think you should let them be archaeology. They're busy being habitat and archaeology. They're doing something, And I don't see any reason to go into the woods where you've got a beautiful old ghostly scenic, wall. And just try to repair them and keep them in good shape, and cut stones, and that's like taking an old piece of furniture, of antique furniture, and just like reshaping it. It's just not the same thing. And so those are the two categories.
So at the talk tonight, I'm just thinking if people are interested in pursuing this, either through Mike, your group, or Ara through your group, do you want like a sign up of people who want to follow up with this and contact this person, or do you just want people to come and listen and go home? If people
I think it's always useful to have people sign up, put their name on a piece of paper, and then you have a group to work with.
Yeah.
It could be an ad hoc steering group with no commitment.
Because Barbara, we could,
meet a couple times.
do a sign up upstairs. All right, so tonight at the meeting, we've hired, just because we're afraid of fire codes or violating the fire code, so Lily and Cameron are going to be taping this, so there'll be people on the first floor, people on the second floor, and we're going to have book sales at Lydia's desk. So we could have sign-up sheets, second floor, first floor, as people exit, and what would you want those
Yeah,
to
if
say?
you give me the words,
Yeah. Who wants
I
to
will,
come up
I
with
will do the
wording?
sign-in sheets
Yeah.
before I.
Do we have clipboards, Barb? You know, clipboards
Even a
that-
sign-up sheet.
Yes, I have
here.
clipboards.
Yeah.
You know, even a name, I'm trying to get people's names here, but even here, you know, do we have a list of who's at the table? Do you? I guess you do. Okay, then we don't need to make a list because we have one. People have enough commitment to spend, 5 hours on stone walls on this afternoon so far.
Tor,
Yeah,
you talked about the age of the stone wall.
yes.
If someone, like from my committee, was to send you a picture of a stone wall, could you date it approximately?
I can do it in dating a wall is challenging. It's the funny thing is that stonewall observation and science is a better way than history to describe a wall and to characterize a wall. You can't get much from the history book. See, the historian's over in the corner there. I think you might agree with me there. There isn't much there. You'll get wall on an old survey, or you'll get it mentioned in a deed, or you'll get an account book said, built some wall. It never says why it is the way it looks and the way it is. And that's what's important for a lot of things. So, I forget what I was going with this. I forget what I was going to say.
Maybe I'll ask the question this way.
Yeah. Oh, so the answer is, with enough information, I can give you a better opinion. I have testified in a number of court cases, on whether something is older or younger than others, and depending on the circumstance and how close up you can look at it. Yes, I could. There is no. The problem is there's a stage is easier to tell than age. By stage, I mean we have children growing up today. You can tell when they're toddlers. You can tell when they're teenagers. You can tell when they're grown up. All right. So, right. But that could happen in the 18th century. You see. So you know how far along someone is in their lifespan. And walls have a pattern of starting in a certain way and then evolving through established farms and then on estates and then in the decay. You can kind of see that pattern, but you can't put it on a century. Other techniques can date walls.
The purpose of my question is, if the committee was to recognize the homeowner about their stone wall, it would be meaningful to have a description as well as date. My stone wall is from 1755.
Sure.
If I could, or one can get such information, then the committee's job would be much easier to incentivize and give a certificate to the homeowner.
Agreed. And the
So it can
only
be
way
done,
to get a
though.
reliable calendar date, like 1765, is to have it connected somehow to the town history, like when that property was developed. But
So
that's a
one
limited.
could- I don't think I have enough time to become even slightly knowledgeable about stone walls. But someone like you can do that.
Someone who's interested in dating a property will know when that property was first platted out, and that gives you a maximum age date. It could younger than whatever that date is. And like all of your walls are younger than the first settlement of Little Compton. So not all. There are some indigenous walls out there, I'm sure. And we're just, we need to keep that in mind. That there's a big movement for ceremonial stone landscapes. And I think a lot of it is, it's like looking for they're there. You can't have people living here for, 15,000 years without doing something with stone. So it's out there. But what does it look like and how is it different from the stuff that we know is from the colonial makeover? And so it's like the needle in the haystack, the ceremonial or indigenous, and that's important to keep track of that. That's there, but it's like a needle in a haystack, And
My purpose is very practical, though. I want to know how I will implement such a thing. The examples again with houses, we have certain criteria. There's chain of deeds that you have to follow, and then architectural design. So your house has 1825 it was built by Claire Johnson, and it's a typical shingle style, whatever. So I'm trying to mimic that concept with the stone wall so that I can implement that.
Yes, yes. If I may, I have spent some time, I'm sorry to interrupt, I have spent some time in the vault up at the town hall, and they have extensive records, some are even on parchment, they go back far enough, in very large books. And you can open those and look at the very early plat maps and whatnot, and the dates, and all handwritten, almost calligraphy.
With the
and
stone
whatnot.
walls?
But they talk about the plot and the farm, and if you can look at the farm and the shape of the plot and whatnot, or now, of course, they might be incorporated into several, you know, one can extrapolate from that the farm, okay, existed at this point, and here are the boundaries drawn. So are the boundaries the stone walls?
That's an extrapolation. The one document that we do have that shows stone walls in the 1890 to about 1910, there were plans to put railroads and streetcars through most of Little Compton. And they did very detailed plat maps that show all the stone walls.
There you go.
So you could find stone walls that existed in 1900.
Perfect.
But there's not much, beyond that, like you say, you're guessing.
Yeah, property, I've done some of this deed and archive work myself, and it's the data's there, it's time consuming. So you don't want to become an expert, but whoever has a piece, responsible for a piece of property, if I were the manager of a land trust, I would want to know what the history of that land trust was, and I would basically build it forward from when it was first farmed, and in our case abandoned. Most of the properties, I mean, Joshua's Trust, which is I'm working with, has 169 properties in eastern Connecticut, all over the whole eastern half of the state is just like one big land trust, and that's a lot of properties. But the deal is, if you start with a model like a land trust, or just roadside, just carve a piece of this, not the whole thing. Like the roadside walls is a mission, and the land trusts can do their own things. Town parks. Do you have parks in Little Compton? Few.
Little Woods is a park.
In the woods, with walls on, like outdoor parks. Because like Connecticut has, what, 200 and some odd state parks, and they don't have an inventory, but they want to do it. But, I'm not going to start with the state government or the federal government now, because it's just like who can do anything there? I think town is the way to go, and land trusts. Just, if you have an inventory, I can help you interpret them. I want people to you don't need to go in the weeds on a classification. You can just take it down to it's a freestanding wall, not a retaining wall. Of the freestanding walls, it's a single, double, broadband, whatever. You can do that. You already know how to do that.
Yeah. I'm a stonemason, so and I've done a lot of restored a lot of historical walls, and I'd be willing to at least give a first impression of of what, if it's a significant wall, a deep, an educated guess.
How do you tell it's significant? I'm sorry to interrupt you,
but just by the construction of it, whether if a lot of effort went into it, not necessarily if it's a significant in that regard, or if it's significant because it's a little bit unusual and a little bit the aesthetic of it is a little different than normal, or it was maybe they had had a little surface quarry on their property, and they had done a little bit of, which a lot of times in Westport you'll see with cut granite walls. Maybe they had quarried it right there. Maybe they brought in a little bit of quarried stone from a larger quarry and done a wall of that type. So I can somewhat give the age of a wall. It depends, you can analyze like the base of the wall, the footings that they prepared, but the size of those stones, if they look like they were moved by hand or by oxen or by sled.
So for a homeowner who cares, that will be really interesting. I think they will like the 1 or 2 pages, that's my wall.
Yeah.
Which is what we're going to do with the homes themselves.
Yes.
Then to give them a citation.
And if you had a town, and you had roads, and you had sort of an inventory of walls along those roads, and then you say you have a property between 2 places with inventory, you say, look, we're trying to inventory, the walls in the town. You have private property, can we come in? They're more likely to say yes if it's a hole in your data. than if you haven't got any survey and you want to start in someone's private property. We haven't quite got all the introductions. I got a couple people that I didn't get, this guy and that guy, and I can't see, so. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Roger Lord, lived in Little Compton since 1971, and I'm a retired electrical engineer from the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport.
Yeah.
We dealt with submarines, not much to do with rocks and stones, but submarines don't like stones, especially if they run into them. Donna asked me to video record what you're doing, and it reminds me of a story I told while we were out there. I had a lot of stonework done in the front of my house, and the guy that was doing it, I happened to be watching him, and I said something like, "Boy, you're doing a great job with these rocks." And he said, "Sir, they are not rocks, they are stones." And I said, "What's that with this guy?" Now I know. So I learned something. Thank you very much.
Okay, so what's this?
Bench.
It's definitely wood.
Right.
This is wood, and it's also a stool. There can be two things at once. It's a stool made of wood, not wood made of stool.
I'm Bob Mushin.
Okay.
I have lived here. I didn't choose my parents correctly, so I've lived here for 33 years, which makes me hardly indigenous. So I'm speaking not from I'm from Little Compton and I know all about it, but I've been on the town council for 21 years.
Wow.
And I believe the reality of this is that this particular effort will be met with greater positive response than has been our efforts, for example, to catalog the wastewater collection systems on people's property. And the reason for that is generally, we're not trying to say, can we come on your property and look and see where you put your septic material, but rather in this case, it's a somewhat less, but again, I emphasize the fact that I don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't been here long enough. But the reality is that we will be able to, I think, ask people the questions that have been posed here.
Yeah.
And I think there will be and there would be a willingness on the council to do such a thing from the standpoint of the reasons that you've put forward as to why it's important.
Well, good for you, 33 years. I mean, you were 21 years on the town council, so.
Yeah, but
you were 12 years here.
Yeah, I'm a rookie. I understand my place, and I'm not trying to step outside the box.
It's work to be on the town council, and you don't get paid a lot. And I think you're right.
This is a particularly difficult time to talk about how much I get paid, because we're about to cause everybody at this table to pay a great deal.
Yeah, and my tax bill came yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you think that there's some positive. My vision is that Little Compton could lead. You know, I don't know which of these towns that are starting this thing or which trust, somebody's going to come up. Yes, we have a paper and press. And yes, we have 3 trial situations. I'm answering your early question. And yes, we can see the patterns. Like the walls are higher next to the road than they are moving away. Do you know that until you inventory them? No. That the walls come from different sources on one side of town than from the other. Did you know that until you inventoried them? No. That walls are better built, radiating away from original homesteads until you get within the zone of a bigger farmstead that took over another one, and you can see the remaking of walls. You can see that in the wall pattern. The mason could see that in the wall pattern too. But you can't do it until you have sort of like a regional, and you're not going to be doing a trust property. I think you're going to do a town.
So I kind of keep going back to, remember when the Historical Society a few years ago, you made a townwide project of cleaning up the gravestones.
Yeah.
And you taught people, there were workshops on how to clean them, and I'm wondering if we could do kind of something like that. Maybe, Kevin, you could make a video, or 4, you could make a video of these are the classifications of stone and kind of train people to understand the different types of stone, to do an inventory. So you could say, like, I know here in Chase Point, a group of us got together and we cleaned the cemetery here, the Shaw Cemetery. And that was good, but you could get this community to say, all right, let's inventory our stone walls, or I don't know, work community by community or street by street, but I think it could be a roadside. Let's concentrate on the roadside walls. But I think having people's names, phone numbers, emails tonight might be a start. But who would take on that project of organizing that? I don't know. Would it be our, or would it be, so, would it be your, what's your group, Mike? What's it called?
The planning board?
The planning board. So what's the document that you're in the process?
Well, the comprehensive community plan
That's it.
would have a section about maintaining rural character as a broad category that seems to be a fallback justification for all kinds of causes, but stone walls are one of them.
That's where this would fit, in that comprehensive community plan.
Correct.
All right, and then Aaron, your group, all right, so that's Mike's group, and Aaron, your group is called
Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, HPAC.
All right, so, I mean, what would this be, a subgroup of those, one of those, or, I don't know, how would you go about organizing this if we were to do that?
I think those two entities would have two different functions. One function would be to encourage,
reward,
reward. The other, as Mike brought up, on a regular basis, we define what action items we are considering. And those action items could include whatever degree of effort we want to do with stone walls in Little Compton. And that doesn't then say, so day after tomorrow, you're gonna see us walking on your property with a clipboard. Rather, it says, that's a goal that we have, that we want to fulfill. And then that goal gets prioritized among other things. And so there's opportunity for public input, which I think will be critical to it.
So is there agreement to have a sign up tonight for people? Or
Yeah,
no?
anybody that wants to
All
work
right.
on it, yeah.
All right.
Sign up for what?
Sign up for, that's what I'm trying to get the wording of, what? If you are interested in working toward
Inventorying and maintaining.
Conservation.
No, inventory, stone walls. Inventory and maintain. Preserve stone walls.
Do you want preserve instead of conserve?
Just imagine 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, you have a really nice pamphlet or a nice internet set or a really nice lesson plan in a school that talks about Little Compton is famous for its stone walls. These are the kinds, these are the variation, this is what the normal wall looks like, these are their basic stories, these are the 6 different stories that they tell that all converge to tell a really nice larger story. All right, and your school children a generation from now are getting this. And we can't do that right now. You know, we can't do that right now because we don't have the census data.
It seems to me the first step is inventory, correct?
I think I didn't realize that until this spring. I started saying, you know, inventory is a pretty simple word, and I started thinking about census as another word because people relate to that. Yeah.
So when you do an inventory or a census, you often do a sample. You can't do every wall in town, but we want to pick every 1/10 of a mile, 1/10 of a mile every mile. How do you go about sampling to make this as a doable project?
What I would do, and what I have recommended, but I think it depends on every single town. It's really, I'm not gonna do this, the town will do it, or the community will do it, or I don't know who's gonna do it, maybe nothing will happen. You know, all I can do is try and help get it started.
Okay, because I have, if I can get a statement like this, I can email Barbara and she'll print it out and have it up tonight. So, can I read what I drafted so far? Yes, I am interested in working on a plan for the inventory and preservation of stone walls in Little Compton. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
All right, so I am going to
Not too
send
short,
that.
not too long, just right.
Is that okay?
I think
And then
it's-
she'll make a sign up and we'll have them available tonight, and then this will be, I'll give the two of you copies. Does anyone else want a copy of the people who sign up?
The Historical Society.
Okay, all right, so LCHS, Mike, I'm giving you one just to keep you in the loop.
Thank you.
And Ara, anybody else? Okay, so then, okay,
Excellent.
all right.
So Thor, let me fast forward to the maintenance. So we've, as been pointed out, great sensitivity to Roundup, being specific. However, there has been, amongst some environmental groups, a recognition that what they refer to as clip and dip, where they go and they just cut the root at the base and take a paintbrush and hit it.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if in your travels, what the methods of maintenance and restoration, not restoration of the stone per se, but to uncover some walls that are historic. And
I'll say that from my point of view, this is kind of pioneering. I mean, I have made the recommendation that they do clip and dip, but it's usually someone's property.
Oh yeah.
You know, or some tiny roadside, or some individual, and it's not, you know, any wider than that. I know on Block Island, they were very worried about too much invasive covering their signature walls, and they were quite liberal in herbiciding them. And on a private property, you just do that. You just like spray the edge and it works better. And I think that some mechanical, you know, I think there's a lot of work being done on invasives to get them away from habitats. You know, like the, you know, the taking over forests and streams and whatever. I mean, at least where I live, that's a big deal. You know, I mean, you get teams of people going and do it. But think about the stone wall on the roadside as a habitat. You know, and that's, you know, getting those invasives off of there, I think is justified. I really think we should clear the, knowing that the long-term history of walls, long after all of us are gone, is they're all going to fall apart and disaggregate and go back. And that's okay. I like feeling part of that eternity. You know, but on the short term, the here and now, the managing the historic landscape requires trimming, full sunlight. I mean, the full sunlight, boom, you got plant growth. You know, in the shaded forest. Look, that's what a wall would look like if it didn't have full sunlight in those deep interior woods. I just love those walls.
Yeah, the vegetation along walls can form really vital corridors for wildlife to move from point A to point B. And all the better if it's native species, but often it's not.
Yeah.
I have two comments about the citizen science component of what we could do. So Little Compton, to my knowledge, has at least one pretty successful citizen science project, and that's the Conservation Commission's well water study, which is how I met Donna and a lot of people, because I worked on the well water study for 5 years.
I probably have the worst well in Rhode Island, the worst, I mean.
I can't talk about what water quality people have, but it's still going on its 7th year now, with someone else doing the sampling, and that has been, I think, pretty successful, pretty well received, enthusiastic, and people, you know, there's actually a bit of a wait list for more people to want to join the study, but that is you know, that's a citizen-sized project that's ongoing, and URI works with the town of Little Compton to do the data analysis. And then on a larger scale, what I'm thinking about just as far as getting an inventory and people in town participating in the inventory is, I learned recently at the Rhode Island Stormwater Innovation Center has this program where basically they assign citizens to go wait for like a heavy precipitation event and then go to this swale on the side of the road or this storm drain or something and photograph how the stormwater is being, you know, funneled or behaving around these stormwater projects that are all around Rhode Island that are hopefully getting better and you know, improving the water in Narragansett Bay and all that. So that is the thing that if everyone in town has a smartphone, then you could have some sort of app or web portal where you can go and geotag your photos of the wall, and it goes into a central database. So then, like, you know, if Barry's out walking on Peckham Road, he's taking pictures of the walls. I'm on Burchard, I'm taking pictures of my walls, and they're going to some sort of repository, and they all have GPS coordinates.
Yeah,
and that at least is a start.
Yeah, that's a part of it. That's a wonderful, I mean, you can do that with geocaching or tagging or people. I can't write the app because I'm not skilled enough to do it, but lots
Claire
of
Johnson's daughter might want to do it. She might.
Kate might want to do it.
She's coming in town. She couldn't make this, so. Well, I forgot to tell her that it is going to be, all right.
Well, she's...
All right, can I just, let me, because I did make a little change. Yes, I am interested in helping to work on a plan for the inventory and preservation of stone walls along the roadsides in Little Compton. So it's not like private property. Is that okay with everybody?
I like it when it was just open-ended.
Don't take out on the roadsides?
Yeah. It may be that's what we spend.
I think, we may arrive there. That's, I think what Abigail was just saying. We may arrive at the roadsides, but this, with the former wording, you're going to get every person who would have the willingness to be able, regardless if it's roadside or their personal.
And the citizen science.
I'm interested in helping to work on a plan for the inventory and preservation of stone walls in Little Compton.
Right. Because that fits with this, Thor is saying with Adam's idea of geocaching, people private property.
Okay.
Yeah. You need a layer, you know, the town has 20 layers in its GIS system of some sort, you know. If you had a stone domain layer or something like that, you could start, just putting it in there. And you know, you've got, the assessor has a layer, you know, the planner has a layer, the wetlands commission has a layer, you know, just add a layer for the stone domain, and then you can map that along wherever it goes, and you can add to it from the top down with LiDAR, and you can add to it from the bottom up with the geocaching. And New Hampshire's doing that. New Hampshire has it kind of went defunct, but they have a New Hampshire Stonewall Mapper. It was put together by a geologist from the Geological Survey, but they unfunded it. That's New Hampshire, but they have 12,000 miles of stone walls mapped in New Hampshire by citizen science.
Wow.
And when I say mapped, I mean there's a line on the map, you know, and that means somebody put it there, probably with a tag, you know. And this is citizen science. They can't get enough of it. But the problem is, and I've opened dialogues with them. They haven't inventoried them. They haven't ground truthed them, you know. The staff of the state hasn't gone to verify the citizen science who could be making it up. They probably aren't, but you know how it is. There's a different standard there. And then, but to my mind, none of those are classified. There's a wall the size of this, there are walls the size of this, the width of this building, you know? I mean, you know, one over there, and it's just filled with junk. I've seen walls 20 feet wide, you know, that are basically used to fill rubble. You may not see them around here, but they exist. And there's a lot of terrain in the hinterlands of rural Connecticut in the east that are just bands. You know what I'm talking about, the sprawling, you know, the surveyors see them, you know, and they'll be listed on a surveyor map as a wall, but it's just like a mound of just a narrow mound of stone. And those are not the same thing, but on GIS they show up at exactly the same thing. And one would be the most spectacular, chipmunk habitat you ever saw. You know, and the other one is just it's an old fence line. But that's information. And I think the citizen science thing is key, and an app is key. The classification can be turned into an app if somebody, you know, were efficient with it. I'm not. I wrote it as a dichotomous key. You know, is it this? Is it that? Is it that? Bingo! This is your wall. You know, it's your class. You know, it's that easy.
Thanks, Donna, for trying to pull that together, you know, into something cohesive that comes out of this discussion.
Well, I think that would be nice if we
Yeah.
could do that, so
As
I'm
well as
trying.
organizing the whole thing altogether.
Yeah,
And by the way, this is pioneering. You know, I mean,
Really?
this is, I have been trying, I didn't do much of this because I have a complicated life and I was busy, but this spring just sort of happened. Things sort of lined up in a row, you know, I'm this age, grandkids aren't babies anymore, you know, I'm just, and I'm not gonna last forever. And, you know, then I just started thinking that we should start working on a systematic inventory and mapping of different places. And yes, a couple of places that I've talked to, and these are places not that different from here, where people are invested in the place, it has scenic rural character, a lot of retired people have some time on their hands to put some thinking into it, and they care a lot about it, and they want to do something to pay it forward a little bit. And this is Stonington, Connecticut, you know, with the adjacent Avalonia Land Trust, you know, that's a town with wherewithal, you know, and then Lyme, Connecticut, same thing, you know, and then Litchfield, Connecticut, it's the same thing. What is it? Not Little Compton, but Cumberland, Rhode Island called me out of the blue and said, you know, can you help us with an inventory? And I said, sure I can. So next fall I'll be doing a day, I'll be doing the same sort of thing. I'll go there and we'll meet people, with stakeholders, and take a tour and try and generate some interest and bring in the public to a lecture. And you're doing it. You're going to do it your way. You know, there is no template. But down the road where I'm at is when state government comes back, you know, when government in general and state government in particular, you know, that we have a state with, you've got a bunch of state parks in Rhode Island. You know, what would stop a state administrator from putting a Stonewall inventory in their workflow of the Department of Conservation and Recreation if you're in Massachusetts? They're working on this, you know, but you know, it's just so slow. I think towns and communities are really where the interest is, and even a land trust. You know, I really think that this is pioneering. I don't know, what we'll have is we'll have probably 5 or 6 entities, you know, we'll come up with some kind, here's how we did it. You know, and 10 years down the road, we'd say, wow, we had 5 or 6 entities and this is the kind of thing they were able to do with their resources, you know? And they did different things and boy, they're making progress. There's something to pass down to the next generation. That's what conservation's all about anyway. So I'm very encouraged by this meeting and by your interest and your enthusiasm. And I can be a help, but I can't. I'm not even pretending that I know your community. You do.
no, but, I mean, like.
You're not from here.
No.
I've been here 33 years too, Bob, and it's not easy to know, you know, the community or.
But this is community building, Donna. Thank you for that.
Well,
You're helping to build community by holding this in your house.
yeah, I've built a few things, yeah.
If the town got interested, that's community building. You know, that's like roadside pickup, or it's like track monitoring flow, storm flow.
I just don't think the residents realize what I mean, do you think there's an appreciation?
It's not taught.
Do you think?
I agree with that.
Barry, what do you think?
I got a lot of thoughts here, but
Yeah, I'm curious, because you haven't said much, and yeah.
What's your role, Barry?
I'm sitting right here in this chair. That's
He's an interested citizen, and his sister volunteered him.
I came back, I grew up here, but I came back 5 years ago, and the walls were, well, because I'd been away for a while, I saw what has happened to the walls. And what's happened is they got a lot better in the ones you see from the road. And people are putting, you know, gazillions of bucks into fixing up their little place. And that was mentioned in your book too, about, you know, it became a status symbol at some point in the past to really take a wall into a really nice wall, a state wall, maybe is what you called it.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of that, and that makes me wonder, You know, we're talking about documentation and preservation of this moment in time when Little Compton stone walls are being very well cared for, better than at any time in my lifetime. There have been a few degradations on Peckham Road where I grew up, where I live now. The state came along and decided they needed better gutters on either side of the road, so they bulldozed the soil away from the walls, which then fell down, you know, and so they're in way worse shape than when I was a kid. Are we gonna document that? Are we gonna preserve that degradation? Is that, you know, like, I don't know what to do with that sort of, if we're gonna freeze a moment in time, and the moment is now when we document it, a wall that's 3 years old is gonna be documented like a wall that fell down 50 years ago.
Well, that's part of the inventory, is the age, and if you have any age control, you put it in there, so that is gathered. I would like to say that the whole census history of, like, Little Compton gains in population, loses in population, and gains it again, you know? I mean, how do you tell that? Census data.
Yeah.
You know, so, yes, we're at a moment in time, totally right about that. In 100 years ago, it's not the same. And even in your lifetime, it's not the same.
Right.
So I'm just saying, ages. If you have any, if you document what you can within a narrow window. I mean, anyone who's trying to do a science project, you have to, you know, there's a certain period of time where your study goes and then it's over. You know, so we would want to do something, but this could be a continuing effort. Parts of it would matter how old it is, and parts of it is just you just monitor and add to it.
Yeah. A couple more things. One, Marjorie O'Toole over at the Historical Society has written a book that indicates, you know, and she does a lot of research. So she did the thing where she said that enslaved Native Americans and later enslaved African Americans were the ones who built the walls in Little Compton.
Right.
Well, but by your book, Stone by Stone, that doesn't jive at all. It doesn't. So there's something to be resolved there. Who built what when?
Oh.
Little Compton is a real outlier. It does not fit the model that you're talking about.
Say that, Steve, again.
Little Compton is an outlier. It does not fit the model of most of New England because our walls are built. There's 120 miles of stone wall in Little Compton by 1750, which is way earlier than any place else.
Right.
So it's an unusual story. It's not a typical one.
So my other thought, besides the planning group and the historical group, I know that the Historical Society plans years in advance for your thing. Do you see the stone walls coming into as maybe a possible topic?
Good question to be talked about.
Yeah.
I can't commit one way or
No, I wouldn't think so, but might you, if this gets some momentum going, is it something that your organization might?
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so,
Right, Fred, maybe, who knows? Because have you ever done anything on the walls per se?
I don't think so.
They've been on the periphery. I know when you did the farm, it's always been like a sidebar.
Yeah.
I think on the periphery will be the name of the exhibit.
Walls by their nature are on the periphery.
Are on the periphery.
Were you finished, Barry?
Or why we have the 2-acre limit.
Yeah, so, well, I've done some fixing up of walls along Peckham Road. If they're documented now, it's as if they were always like that. I didn't, there's a barway, an existing historical barway, but, you know, a few bulldozers went through and now it's a much wider barway. So if we document that, does that freeze that in time?
No. There's just, you always are working in a slice of time. And things are going to be changing in one part of the town and not in another. The best you can do is the best you can do. You know, it's just let's just take the advantage of LiDAR, let's put a layer in somewhere in the town, somewhere, you know, and let's just populate that layer, you know, with stuff about the stone domain. Where are the piles, where are the forts, where are the walls, where are the whatever, you know, and build a picture together. And in terms of your question about did the slaves build, I've had people get angry and shout and walk out of my talks because I didn't agree with the statement that the Irish built all the walls. All right? And all it takes is it's clear that slave people were used to build some walls in Rhode Island. All right? And it can be documented specifically in a couple of cases. Right? And there's no question that the indigenous were enslaved and then indentured laborers, and then, you know, where's the boundary? How do you know? Just because a teenager built a wall, you know, in Cumberland doesn't mean that the walls of Rhode Island, you know, were built by teenagers. And it's in order to make that kind of a claim, you need to have an inventory or some data, or like a census.
Yeah.
Because if a wall is built by a slave, or a team of slave, or a gang of indigenous, or whatever, there's going to be a template for that wall. The mason knows that, and it's going to look a certain way, and they're just going to build that wall. But the walls where I'm from are higgledy-piggledy, like 100 feet here and 100 feet there. And, you know, these are built by farmers' sons in an afternoon, you know, in winter. You know, and it's just like a stretch. And so that kind of information comes out of the ground, and you can't argue with it if you just simply have a, you know, it's there, it's real, and you're going to look at it.
Yeah.
But there's no question that they were involved. I read a whole book about, and cited it in this book, in this manual, about indigenous, and it's not a huge factor. You know, it's true in some cases, but it's not. I don't see the evidence to generalize it over broad areas.
Yeah.
Most of the walls in my country are built by the people who own the land with money from the land. And yeah, you'd add an indentured person for a day. Yeah, you'd get a day labor. Yeah, it might be a freed slave. Yeah, it might be 4 or 5 indigenous people coming by saying, we're starving, can we do some work for you? And then they build a little bit of wall, and then they're gone. You know, it's sort of ephemeral.
And then I think it progressed also, like, people were more skilled at it than other people, and those are the people that did, you know, came closer to that house and they built more of the estate walls. It was,
That's right.
And they may have been migrants of one, you know, who knows what era
That's right.
they were coming over. It was Irish, maybe it was even Finns, it could have been anything, you know, there's just this whole progression of people, just the same people who worked in quarries. It's always just a progression. What migrant group was coming over at that time? They were the lowest ones on the totem pole.
That's right.
And maybe they had a certain skill, but still it wasn't like, so I think it varied.
My great-grandfather's group, they were the Norwegians that came over starving, you know, I mean, it's the same old story from Europe, you know, starving people come, and there's this quote I read once in a history book, said Norwegians were cheaper than dynamite for making a railroad cut or something like that. You know, it was just like getting a dime a day or something like that.
I'm going to pass around this article too, so here's what they did over, where is this, in Newport, Winnick Island, and they got a grant. I mean, it's possible, what is it? Yeah, the Van Buren Charitable Foundation for restoring Aquidneck Island stone walls, the Norman Burge Sanctuary. So, I mean, there's probably grant money that this group got going.
Even
they could fund it.
The woman, I forget, Abigail was her name, from Cumberland, she's the town planner in Cumberland, and she just contacted me and we had a couple of conversations. I said, sure, I can do this. She said, well, I'm putting in a grant. You know, what do you think I should do to put in a grant to the state to do something or other? And if you had a grant, you know, you could pay, you know, somebody to supervise, you know, minimum wage and people doing whatever they're doing. And you get a lot of money.
We could pay people to do workshops, you know, on how to
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
One more thing, and I'll be quiet. In terms of preservation, what we're really doing after we document what's here is, because we know, and you know, walls fall down, walls get built up, on and on. So what we're really preserving or conserving is the wall line, the old place where the wall has been from who knows how far back, could it be 20 years or 200. So when you preserve a wall line, what sort of regulations have you seen about that? And because the walls are tumbled down, it would have to be not just a line, but a strip on either side of the wall where the stones are tumbled down. And have you seen anything like, okay, it's gonna be 5 feet or 2 feet each side of a wall line?
In Connecticut, the property line runs through the middle of the wall. It's
Yeah.
part of surveying language, and so you can't take either side of it. And if that's tumbling down, you simply put them back. And I don't think a change, I'm not the lawyer on here, or even the planner or the accountant, but it's not been an issue. I know Connecticut has that wall. I got involved in one case where, you had a perfectly good wall, but it was like rounder stones, and this property owner just took their half, from the wall. And of course, what happens is this half collapses over there because that's where it's unsupported. All right, and then he took the ones that were on his property, and then it collapsed some more.
Yeah.
And then he took the walls, and he was strictly legal to do that, but that's being discouraged now. You can't do it in Connecticut now without having both property owners agree.
Oh, that's all you need is an
I
agreement?
think that's all you need.
So it's not so many feet each side?
I think there's a rule. I think you could even interpret, I think you could interpret your state law to say you can't do that.
I think in Rhode Island it's a larceny if it's unauthorized removal of a boundary wall.
Yeah, and and that's the way it's in the rule, larceny, but it's, if you, unauthorized removal is having your neighbor's walls collapse onto yours. You're taking your stones, right?
But your example, he was removing the support to the other side.
He's removing the support, so that would be a larceny. I mean, everybody would, I think.
There's a case here in town right now where a wall had degraded to the point of rubble, and it's closely abutting a body of water, and the owners of the property just rebuilt the wall, and it's on the foundation of what was the wall. They put the stones back up, and now they're going through all kinds of recourse with the Coastal Marine Resources Management because the wall was fixed. So I don't know how that's going to come out, but I mean, what a situation! What a situation!
And what's too bad?
It's a shame.
I mean, we all know about regulation. They're onerous, they're confusing, they're hard, but you gotta have them. You can't have people just, riding down the street with 6 guns shooting people.
Right.
You need a regulation against that. But there's a big burden of regulation.
Yeah.
That's frustrating to hear.
Oh, it's a shame.
Yeah, I think.
Costed a lot of money.
Yeah,